Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this, and welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host, my name is Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour I'm going to be talking about several things that I hope you will find interesting enough. If you have any questions or reactions to the show, you can always email them to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. And if you didn't catch that, you can go to my website. It is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be here a couple of times during the show. You can go there, you can leave a comment there, or you can get the email address from there if you didn't write it down. If you do send me email, just two requests. One is to include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is about the show, it's not spam. And two, please be a little patient about getting an answer. So with that, let's get on with it. I always like to start with some good news. As it wasn't the best week for good news, but I did manage to find a few bits. The first thing is that nearly 4 years ago, I told you about an emerging bank scandal involving something that's called LIBOR. This is the London Interbank Offered Rate. It's derived daily from the estimates of a consortium of 18 international banks. Their estimates of what interest rate they will pay for the overnight loans they take out from other banks. And so lumping all these together, it's supposed to serve as an indication of the actual market cost of those loans. It's an important figure because LIBOR provides the baseline for a variety of other loans and financial transactions. It directly affects, in fact, about $10 trillion in loans, and it indirectly affects an estimated $800 trillion in economic activity. The influential financial magazine, The Economist, calls it the single most important figure in finance. And nearly 4 years ago, it emerged that for years, the banks, or at least a sufficient number of them, had been manipulating the rate in pursuit of their own profit. The scandal started with Barclays Bank, and it spread out from there. And over the intervening 4 years, about a dozen banking houses and financial institutions have paid about $9 billion in fines to resolve government investigations by various nations around the world. What's relevant here is that there were also suits by investors who charged that by depressing the LIBOR rate, these banks had also depressed their returns on investments that depended upon the LIBOR rate. In fact, they had cheated them out of money. Now, in 2013, a U.S. district court dismissed the suits, saying that the investors had not proved that they were harmed in a way that would permit a suit under U.S. antitrust law. The good news here is that a couple of weeks ago, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals overturned that decision and said that the suits can proceed, which means that 16 of the world's biggest banks, including Bank of America, Citicorp, and J.P. Morgan Chase, are still on the hook for the losses they caused by their pursuit of profit. The ruling, as one analyst put it, is far from a home run for the investors because the district court could still look to dismiss the suit on other grounds. But for the moment, just enjoy the image of bankers sweating. All right, we also have some good news on the environment, and it's also actually as an illustration of why the Supreme Court is of particular importance for this election. Start with one step back. The White House's Clean Power Plan is intended to take some step against global warming by reducing the emissions of carbon dioxide from existing power plants by a third by 2030. Now, it's still in the planning stage, but it includes a regulation requiring states to submit their own plans for shifting from fossil fuel energy sources to more alternative sources. In February, in one of the last decisions of which Justice Antonin Skeletor took part, the Supreme Court made the almost unprecedented move of stepping in to block implementation of that regulation before it had been reviewed by a lower court. That this was the result of a divided court is made clear from the fact that 4 justices, Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan, objected to this stay. Okay, fast forward to June 13th, and we find that the Scalia-less Supreme Court is refusing to take an appeal from 20 states to block federal environmental regulations that limit the emissions of mercury and other harmful byproducts of the burning of coal. Coal-burning power plants, in addition to their other problems, are the nation's largest source of human-made mercury pollution. But the states were arguing that the benefits of these regulations did not match up to the costs of them. However, in April, the EPA, after recalculating and revising the method it used to calculate those costs, concluded that for every dollar spent to make these cuts in emissions, the public will get up to $9 in health benefits. Now, this is not technically the end of the matter, since those cost estimates can themselves be subject to challenge. But since many utilities have already complied with these new regulations, the claim that they are unaffordable seems to have lost a lot of its punch. Which leaves now just one question for those 20 states. Are you interested in the health of your citizens or in the profits of your paymasters in the energy industry? And we have good news on a rare front, the front of guns. On June 9th, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that there is no constitutional right to carry a concealed weapon. The case is Peruta v. County of San Diego, and it was about a California law that required people to prove they have good cause for needing to carry a concealed weapon before they could get a license to do so. San Diego County and Yolo County do not consider general self-defense to be a good cause. Put another way, these counties are saying, well, because I just wanna is not a good enough reason. The plaintiffs challenge those guidelines as naturally a violation of their incredible pure right to carry whatever heat they want, however they want, wherever they want. However, the court ruled, and I'm quoting here, the protection of the Second Amendment, whatever the scope of that protection may be, simply does not extend to the carrying of concealed firearms in public by members of the general public, unquote. The ruling covered the history, or a history, of laws relating to concealed weapons from England in the 1500s right up to the Heller decision, which was the Supreme Court decision that for the very first time declared that there is an individual right to own a gun. Here, the Court of Appeals reminded us that that very same decision, which was authored by Antonin Skeletor, that very same decision said that the right to own a gun is not absolute, and actually cited restrictions on concealed carry as an example of where it's not absolute. Now, the ruling was narrow. The court avoided the question of whether or not the Constitution protects openly carrying a gun in public, saying that was actually not an issue here. But since California also bans the open carry of weapons in public in most circumstances, the gun nuts will likely seek to make that an issue in the near future. Still, a win is a win is a win, and that is good news. But the topic of guns leads us directly to the elephant in the room, Orlando. Orlando, which will now be invoked in the same tones as Aurora, San Bernardino, and Newtown. In the early hours of Sunday, June 12th, a man named Omar Mateen walked into an LGBTQ nightclub called Pulse in Orlando, Florida. He was armed with a Sig Sauer MCX, which is reasonably described as an AR-15 type assault rifle, semi-automatic rifle, and a 9mm Glock pistol. He opened fire. When it was all over 3 hours later, 50 people, including Mateen, were dead and 53 more were wounded. And so once again, we have to face up to the reality we tried so hard to ignore, to forget, the reality of mass violence in America. And we have to forget, and we have to face again what we try to forget, that the common denominator in almost all of these cases is an AR-15 type assault rifle. And don't give me any of that crap about there's no such thing as an assault rifle, or the fallback that this isn't an assault rifle because it's not fully automatic, and all the rest of that evasive self-serving crap. The fact that these weapons can fire repeatedly as fast as you can pull the trigger, about 45 rounds a minute, and the fact that they can carry high-capacity magazines, and the fact that they have repeatedly proved their value in committing mass murder are more than enough to overcome those weasel word objections. Now, the exact number of mass shootings depends upon how you define the word. How many have to die for it to be mass shooting? How many have to be injured? In fact, do any of the victims have to actually die because they were, after all, shot? Does it have to be a single incident, or can it be multiple incidents, such as the Virginia Tech shooting, for example? And if there are multiple incidents, how close do they have to be geographically or chronologically or whatever? The argument about the details of definitions goes on. But what is clear is that by any definition, the home base of mass shootings is the United States. According to its own measure of mass shootings, the FBI found that from 1966 to 2012, just under a third of all of the mass shootings that took place anywhere in the world took place in the United States, even though we have less than 5% of the world's population. The fact is, we have too damn many guns, and they are too damn easy to get. And even talking about mass shootings, that dramatically understates the daily carnage that guns bring to the United States, the vast, vast majority of which have nothing to do with mass killings or mass shootings, but rather involve the slow daily grind of blood. This graphic comes from work compiled by the Washington Post that reflects figures for the United States for the year 2015. 25,000 gun-related injuries in 2015. That's more than 68 a day. 12,000 gun-related deaths, half of them suicides. That's nearly 33 a day. But only 39 deaths from mass shootings, just over 0.3% of total gun deaths. Mass shootings, mass tragedies such as Orlando get our attention, but they do not truly reflect the daily carnage produced by guns. We have too damn many guns, and they are too damn easy to get. And even when we are faced with the latest atrocity, when we are faced with such as Orlando, we have our escape clause, our one-size-fits-all excuse for gun-enabled mayhem. Oh, the shooter was mentally disturbed, not normal. They were troubled. And what we really need to do is focus on better mental health treatment, certainly not on guns. But that's largely a myth. It's a satisfying myth that enables us to ignore the looming presence of guns, but it's a myth nonetheless. Best and recent research shows that there is no reliable predictive value associating mental health with gun violence. Put another way, the research says that people with mental illness are no more likely to be violent toward others, especially to commit mass violence toward others, than anybody else is. We simply cannot dismiss the harsh truth of mass violence with the slogan, better mental health programs. Those sorts of programs are justified on their own account, but they will not deal with the issue of mass shootings. But the thing is, having said all that, the thing is that the more we learn about Omar Mateen, the more the description of troubled seems to fit this case. His first wife, a marriage that lasted just 4 months until she was, in her words, rescued by her family. She described Mateen as bipolar, as being violent, as having beaten her. A co-worker at G4S Security, where he'd been a security guard, described Mateen as unhinged and unstable, said he frequently made homophobic and racial comments, and the co-worker said he quit after Mateen started sending him multiple texts every day. A woman who went to middle school with Mateen described him as a troublemaker in school, claiming that he once punched a teacher. And then there's the issue of his sexuality. Multiple witnesses said Mateen was seen at Pulse, the nightclub where the shooting happened. He was seen there on as many as a dozen occasions. One said sometimes he would go over in the corner and sit and drink by himself. Other times he would get so drunk he was loud and belligerent. He also used the gay chat and dating app called Jacked, including exchanging messages on and off for a year with one man. And others reported related experiences, including one man who said Mateen asked him out on a date. But at the same time as that, there was that co-worker G4S who said Mateen made homophobic statements, and the claim of Mateen's father that he'd become enraged a few months before the shooting when they were in downtown Miami and he saw two men kissing each other. And of course, there's the blunt fact of the shooting itself. The shooting carried out at an LGBTQ nightclub of which he had been a patron. Now, what all this adds up to me, what I get from this is someone brought up in a home that condemned homosexuality. In fact, in a recent video, his father said, God will punish those involved in homosexuality. Brought up in a home that condemned homosexuality, but who struggled with and hated his own homosexual or bisexual desires, until finally his own self-hatred was turned outward. That is, it seems to me, this is a case where the label unstable individual, that label that we like to apply to mass murder, this seems to be a case where it actually does apply. And we're going to take a break. Hi there, and we are back. So, as I was saying, Omar Mateen seems to have been an unstable individual who acted out of his own self-hatred, acted it out on the lives of others. But unlike most other mass killers, he is being denied that narrative of the unstable individual, while another narrative is being foisted on us. And I can tell you exactly when that change happened, when we found out his name was Omar Mateen. Initially, news accounts called the tragedy a shooting and continued to do so for hours after officials indicated that it was being investigated as a possible terrorist incident. But as soon as they knew his name, as soon as they knew is that while he was a U.S. citizen, his parents had come from Afghanistan, the storyline changed. For example, at 9:01 a.m., the morning after the shooting, CBS News tweeted that the shooter had been ID'd as one Omar Mateen. Just 10 minutes later, its description of the event had changed from a shooting to a potential case of Islamic terrorism. Other media outlets quickly fell in line, and what had been a shooting became first a possible and then almost immediately an unquestioned act of Islamic terrorism. Once they knew the accused was named Omar, that was really all they needed. In fact, an early version of Reuters' article about the shooting spent the first 2 or 3 sentences going on about misread flags of Islamist leanings and how it showed the need for greater security and so on. And then immediately thereafter, the very next words were, much remains unknown about what Mateen's motives were. In other words, we don't know why he did it. But so what? Red flags, Islamist leanings, security, be afraid. Every hint of some possible connection to some radical Islamist individual or group was reported breathlessly. Past FBI investigations were mentioned over and over and over again. The fact that the FBI investigated this guy and found nothing there could not be allowed to be proof that there was nothing there. Oh no, it had to be proof of misread flags. A big deal was made out of the fact that Mateen and his wife, Noor Zai Salman, that they visited Disney World in April. Oh my God, he was scouting out Disney World as a possible site for a massacre. The idea that maybe he was just going to Disney World was apparently beyond the imaginings of our media moguls. I mean, I'm sure that at some point, Mateen went to the local supermarket, another place where there's going to be lots of people around and very little security. Oh my God, he was scoping out the supermarket. But of course, the real big deal was that he claimed to be a supporter of Daesh, of ISIS, in a 911 call he made during the attack. Well, that's proof it's Islamic terrorism. He said it himself. Except, he had previously claimed to be a supporter of Al-Qaeda and of the Al-Nusra Front, even though those 3 groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Al-Nusra, are bitter rivals. In fact, the latter 2 are now fighting each other in Syria. He had also claimed to be a member of Hezbollah, even though Hezbollah is Shiite and the other three are Sunni. FBI Director James Comey said it's not entirely clear at this point what terrorist group he aspired to support. Or as a senior U.S. official put it more pointedly to the Wall Street Journal, he seems to be looking for any opportunity to associate with the terrorist group du jour, which sounds less like some religious fanatic and more like someone who feels powerless trying to feel powerful by associating themselves with something big. Oh, by the way, and speaking of religious fanaticism, recall the description of him going to Pulse, the nightclub, and getting drunk. You do remember that getting drunk is forbidden in Islam, don't you? But of course, none of that could be allowed to derail the narrative. So we had some experts saying that his conflicting claims of loyalty are to be expected from a low-level supporter. In other words, if you claim allegiance to some radical Muslim group, that proves you're a Islamic terrorist. If you swear allegiance to a whole bunch of different conflicting, fighting terrorist groups, that really proves that you're an Islamic terrorist. Likewise, the failure to find any connection between Mateen and any group simply proved he'd been radicalized online. The idea that whatever his political beliefs may or may not have been, the idea that his murderous rampage was not driven by religious fanaticism, or indeed of any fanaticism other than fanatical hatred of LGBTQ people, that idea was never entertained. Our media has been, as is all too common, a miserable failure. But as the saying goes, facts are stubborn things, and I have been somewhat encouraged by the fact that over the past day, or the past, say, 36 hours, the storyline is slowly, reluctantly being clearly dragged from describing the heinous event as terrorism toward describing it as a hate crime. Now, the difference matters more in the legal technicalities of what actually defines terrorism as opposed to a hate crime. It matters in understanding what happened and what it means for our society. Calling something terrorism suggests that it was intended to affect more than the immediate target. That in this case, it was intended to terrorize the entire rest of the LGBTQ community with visions of similar fates. But frankly, in my reading of Omar Mateen, I really wonder if such terrorizing was part of his motivation. Now, maybe it was, in which case this could reasonably be called terrorism, but I wonder if it wasn't more strictly, as I described it earlier, an expression of self-loathing turned outward, an act of pure, unrestrained, blind hatred. Because there's also more than a hint here of what's known as suicide by cop, which refers to situations where someone acts in a way where it seems like they are deliberately trying to provoke police into shooting them, to pass on them the death sentence that they're unable to pass on themselves. If Omar Mateen had wished to carry out an act of terrorism, particularly one in support of some religious fundamentalism or another, he could easily have fled the scene, as, for example, the attackers in Paris did, as the Boston Marathon bombers did. He had more than enough opportunity. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed, he holed up, he announced he was a supporter of 911 in that, of ISIS rather, in that 911 call. In subsequent conversations with cops, he told them, among other things, that he was going to strap bombs to people and put them in various places around the building. He pretty much did everything except come right out and say, "Come get me, coppers." Until finally, perhaps to his ultimate relief, they did. So why is it important that we see this more as a hate crime than as terrorism? Because as long as we maintain the terrorism narrative, we can continue to tell ourselves that this is primarily a case of the other, the alien, not in terms of citizenship, but in terms of nature, the alien in our midst, and it doesn't involve us in any way other than as victims. But if we face the fact that, as we should, that this was not an act of terrorism, but except by the most general meaning of the word, and if we accept that, in fact, this is an act of hatred based on homophobia, then we have to recognize that for all the strides that have been made over the past couple of decades, for all the celebrations we've been able to have over gains of rights, for all the gains in acceptance we have been able to watch, still, as Phil Oakes said in a different but still fitting context, beneath the greatest love is a hurricane of hate. Orlando is a bursting forth of the hurricane of hate which our LGBTQ brothers and sisters still face, a hurricane of hate. Perfectly illustrated by this Baptist minister in Sacramento, California. His name is Roger Jimenez, who just hours after the massacre preached to his congregation, "Are you sad that 50 pedophiles were killed today? I think that's great." A hurricane of hate of which Orlando is but one gale. A hurricane of hate that, despite the gains, has yet to blow itself out. And that should be the lesson of Orlando. That and the fact that we have too damn many guns and are too damn easy to get. Okay, a couple of things to wrap up real quick. Let's see if I can get through these. Quick update first to my rant last week about the ending of the primaries and what it will mean in terms of issues that Hillary Clinton and Donald the Rump will try to avoid discussing. It's a bit more, in fact, about what we can expect from, in particular, Clinton. First, she is the candidate of Wall Street, which has raised nearly $23 million for her campaign. Two, she is the candidate of the neocons, a number of who have crossed party lines to support her, declaring in the words of one that Clinton is the candidate of the status quo, the one who will provide continuity with the present and will resist systemic change. Then three, she is the candidate of the hawks. She is the true hawk in the race, far more prepared to be far more aggressive militarily than Obama ever was, and far readier to give the generals whatever they want. Now, this should not be taken as an ad for Donald the Rump. I said, and I still say, that for all her faults, and they are legion, she is still clearly preferable to anybody that the coppers put up. The thing is, though, if you're going to support Hillary Clinton, you should do it knowing what you're going to get. All right, I don't have time for the last item. It'll have to be put aside until next week because it's something I do want to talk about, even though it'll be outdated by then, but that'll just have to be, because again, I am out of time. So what I will do, instead of trying to race through this, I will simply say to you that, as always, you have the best week that you possibly can. We will see you next week. I will make a quick mention here, just for my sake of my own ego, that this is actually show number 250 of Left Side of the Aisle, so it's a bit of a milestone, I suppose. One of those nice round numbers that we like. But for the moment, again, you have the best week you possibly can. And as always, we wish you peace.